So thanks so much, Fusibi, for running this session for us today. I'll give you a minute and then take it away.
Yep, not a problem. Just literally. Yep. Just getting the presentation. Yep, there we go. Yep, sharing screen. Okay. Yep, there we go. Do let me know. You can all see that, right? All right, perfect. Not a problem. So obviously I will. There we go. So yeah, in some things, this session is mainly talking about big picture design. I guess in simple terms, what that means is starting to think a lot more like a senior designer or an individual that wants to progress. You can kind of use these skills either to get into the industry in the first place or kind of use them to progress from kind of being either mid-level or junior. So I'll just talk through a few things. We'll go through a few like scenarios I've kind of been through in my experience interviewing and kind of where you can use these skills. So I guess just a bit of very quick background on me. I kind of already brushed over that, but a bit of background on me. I currently work at Paramount Pictures. So nicely enough, I get to work on a range of different products from like connected TV apps and things like that across like the Nickelodeon, MTV, and but mainly I work on My5, Channel 5, which you might be familiar with. But obviously, alongside, I am an instructor at Love Circular, which is why I'm here. So yeah, some of you may have seen me around or may have heard of me. I was fortunate enough to be UX UI 1, so which is why I was like, ooh, first cohort. But that is, I guess, enough of the background on me. Yeah, so to start, I'll just talk you through a few, I guess, scenarios and examples of skills that will help you, I guess, progress as a designer within the industry. Obviously, some of them are more effective based on your company size. Some of them, they're quite effective if you work at a startup. Some of them are great if you work at a large corporation, but I'll talk you through all of that. So the first one I'll talk you through about today is reliability. It might sound like, one of those very typical age-old skills that you kind of should have, but in the design context, being reliable kind of allows you to be that effective go-to person within your team. So when I kind of say reliability, it's not that person who says yes to every brief or yes to every project that comes their way. So as you progress as a designer, you will get, you will sometimes be asked to do a multitude of tasks. So you could be asked to do, 3 projects at once or 2 projects at once. And it's down to you to kind of manage your capacity. And the more senior you become, that's where your opportunity is to ensure you're not overcommitting or overstretching. So reliability kind of falls into the sense of being able to say no or not yet when certain things come up. So for example, if you've been given a project but you're already working on 2 things, a reliable member of the team would say, do you know what, I wouldn't have this ready by Friday, but I will have this ready by next week, Tuesday. That allows you to kind of, in a sense, show that you have a level-headed self and you're not kind of overcommitting to too many things. And one of the things that I kind of always say and go by is under promise and over deliver. So in a sense, if you tell someone that it will be ready on Tuesday, try to deliver it by Monday or have it, finalized by Monday. So Tuesday, you're not kind of like rambling around trying to get things sorted and put into place. So that's kind of one of the first skills mentioned. The next is be more comfortable with ambiguity. So in a sense, this relates to as you progress in different companies, you will get times where certain briefs are presented to you without a clear definition or a clear like end goal. So for example, they're not saying, can you adapt this button and improve it for our app? what they're saying to you is, we want to improve more traction on the scanning feature we built last year. That has no, I guess, exact like time limit. It has no exact like focus. Obviously, it is down to you to try to kind of, get more detail out of whoever set you the brief. But in some things, dealing with ambiguity is one of the things that kind of makes you a better designer, from my personal experience. In terms of things, what you should try to do in those scenarios is have a process in place that lets you manage ambiguity in the best place possible. So for me is whenever I get a brief like that, I say, do you know what, where does this feature fall in within the user journey? Just for me to understand like where that person's coming from, or very quickly, I'll put together some initial sketches or wireframes just to, I guess, help me kind of think through the process a little bit more. Things like that are very good. And, other members of your team would kind of see you as a go-to person because you have the ability to decipher what kind of comes across as the unknown. Because then there's kind of no benefit in everyone in the team kind of going to a meeting, but everyone's confused about the topic. But you can be that designer that turns up to the meeting and says, hey, I had a look at this, earlier today, and I think one of the best approaches we can do is look at it from this perspective. Even if that isn't completely the right solution, it shows that as a designer, you have the ability to kind of try to break down and add process to what may not already kind of be a process situation. So yeah, I'll take any questions on these kind of at the end and talk through kind of anything if anyone has any. The next is using your voice. I think as a lot of us designers, kind of naturally, most designers can kind of be very introverted and be very kind of humble when it comes to, talking about ourselves or talking about our skills. Especially when, a lot of the time when, we're in interviews, we kind of don't, we don't brag, but in a sense, we kind of should. It's your opportunity to kind of, let people know that you have the skills and you have the ability. But kind of in a workplace setting as a junior designer, what you can do when it says kind of use your voice is if you have the opportunity to present your designs, take that opportunity. Depending on who's kind of in the meeting, if the CEO's there, kind of try to interact with people who you don't necessarily come across on a daily basis, but who are, I guess, higher level stakeholders within the business. It helps you because you kind of develop a level of, level of recognition, and they kind of know your voice from that point. So they can kind of, they know they can call on you for different things because you're not necessarily going to shy away. So obviously I've added some examples. So kind of like, representing your design team in meetings. So if you're the only designer on the call, advocate for the other designers within your team. Like ask, like as I always say, like ask at least like one stupid question in every meeting. Obviously it kind of, there's kind of a range in terms of things, but always ask always trying to find a way to ask a question, even in interviews. Even if you kind of don't feel like you have one, ask one, because it just shows you're curious and you're kind of willing to understand things. And the last one is kind of like publicly recognizing other coworkers. A sign of like a good leader or a good senior designer, in a sense, is when you start to manage other junior designers, is you have to be able to, I guess, be selfless enough to kind of, reward others for their work and what they've done and what they've said. So kind of, add that in if you can. So yeah. And the next one is thinking ahead. This is one that I feel personally has taken me very far in my career, in a sense that I guess to me it's kind of like my secret weapon in kind of every company I've gone to. But whenever I create a design or I'm given a brief, kind of I've shown an example there, I'll kind of, I guess, reshare the presentation if I've kind of also turned this into an article, so I'll share with you guys as well. But in some things is, if you've kind of been given a brief to, help reduce the number of, subscribers who are canceling from your online business or your online service, what you can do in terms of thinking ahead is, rather than just, necessarily, moving pixels around and you solve things and you move like the cancellation button or you change the colors, what you can do at this point is kind of think strategy and think ahead to say, do you know what? Yes, what we can do is, fix this end of things, but what we can even do to make the situation better is improve the onboarding experience, which is the initial process where people sign up, because the reason why people may be canceling is because they didn't know how the app worked in the first place. So having that mindset and kind of thinking ahead in that process is what kind of would make you stand out as a designer, because at the more senior you get, the more strategy you're meant to kind of add to your, I guess, to your artillery in terms of your skill set. So definitely, as best as possible, take the opportunity to, when you just have a brief, I'm not saying kind of, go off the reins and completely change an entire design and completely, not necessarily do what the brief says, but on the side of your work or wherever, even if it's just kind of a note-taking on the side of a project you're working on, just make someone aware that, what, you've decided to just look at this as well, because you feel like, this is a double-edged sword and you can kind of like, fix things from different points and not just by changing, this one screen on your application. So, yeah. And then kind of this one is obviously very optional. I know not everyone kind of, extremely, likes to take this, I guess, role within the workplace, but it's very much being passionate. One thing that helps a lot of designers stand out is just being kind of like that passionate member of the team who's, passionate about design and passionate about resharing like tools, resharing experiences. So what I kind of did in my very early days in my startup experience was, whenever I'd interview like a brand new user for whatever brief I was working on, I would just relay that back to the team and say, oh, by the way, I spoke to, because I worked in kind of built an app for kind of the care home experience, but I kind of go to my manager and say, or in a Teams meeting during a stand-up, and I'd say, oh, guys, by the way, I spoke to, one of the nurses yesterday. This is her experience using our app. She kind of, gave these positives, gave these negatives, and you kind of reshare that with the team. And kind of what I've written there is very important, is you don't need to know everything about a topic to talk about it. What you're literally just doing is you're just trying to add to, I guess, everyone's experience, because not every developer has the opportunity to jump on a user testing experience. But what they like to hear is from a designer, that perspective. So yeah. And the very last one on this is be a team player. In terms of things, this kind of takes different, this is more kind of, I guess, less in the more design route, but more in the other areas. So that's kind of, in terms of things, kind of like, documenting meetings, taking time to, understand like the company strategy, giving like feedback on other people's designs, speaking to and helping like new employees that join like the tech team, even if they're not a designer themselves, but you speak to like the new dev that's joined the team and, kind of let them know that you're available to help. Those kind of little things are what kind of goes a long way, because it helps the team as a whole perform better. And if you can be relied on, for those little things, it definitely helps you to stand out as a kind of, a senior designer in that context. So yeah. And then going on to the next is, yeah. So in some things, here's kind of like a list of the others, which you predominantly would, I guess, ordinarily have initially as a junior designer, but just to kind of, mention them is your communication skills, your ability to problem solve, empathy, collaboration, adaptability, creativity, project management, and presentation. And obviously, one that stands out to a lot of people is like creativity, because some people say, oh, I'm not that creative. Creativity can take different forms. You don't have to be that ideas person that has like an idea every second, but anyone can come up with a creative approach to solving a problem. And that kind of, you can find different ways of doing that. And there's some nice books and stuff you can kind of read up and learn more about kind of, boosting your creativity and things like that. But I can always reshare. But aside from that, there's not kind of just only, the soft skills and the personal skills. There's other things you can do as a designer to kind of help you stand out and help you progress. One of the things I'd say is understanding your product behind the scenes. So if you're working at a business where they're building a mobile app for, Android and iOS users, you can take the opportunity to either speak to a developer or kind of just, look around the business a little bit and understand, okay, is this built with Flutter? How much, HTML and CSS goes into certain functions. The reason that is beneficial is when you go ahead and you design something, you have that context of, do you know what? I think if you haven't previously done it, I think it would surprise a lot of developers if you said, do you know what? I've come up with this. I know it's not necessarily a Flutter pattern, because Flutter is kind of, the platform that some developers build mobile apps on. But if you kind of refer to the tools they use, they'll greatly appreciate little things like that, because it goes a long way in terms of you kind of trying to understand, the pressures they go through to build out your designs. The next is design software documentation, whether that's Figma, Adobe XD, or Sketch. It's just, it sounds like, one of those mundane tasks, but just kind of keeping your files tidy and just having a less cluttered approach to developing things. What that means is anyone could go into your files and completely understand what you're trying to do. If as a junior designer, you're having to kind of over-explain, then unfortunately you're kind of putting yourself in a bad place, because, you shouldn't need to over-explain whatever you've come up with. It should kind of, be easily understood. And a messy Figma file kind of, makes that even harder, because someone doesn't understand the flow of what you've created and the pattern. So even if it's just little things like adding in arrows, adding in annotation, just give someone as much context as possible, because people can look at your files while you're not actually, presenting them. That should say upskill, unskill. Upskill in your design software of choice. I think it's in some things, obviously, there's these little things. We start off like learning Figma, and we learn how to, make buttons and make initial screens. And when you start your first role, it's very easy to be lost in the whole process of, you wake up every day, you move a few things around, you kind of adjust pixels, you take briefs, but it's not very often we get the opportunity to, sit down and say, okay, I don't know how this works on Figma. Let me, watch a video on how to do it. Even if you're just doing it as a separate thing on the side and not related to work, it's like, finally decide to learn auto layouts, or finally decide how, your design system properly works. Little things like that will go a long way, because when you're kind of, I guess, in a more senior position, the expectation is not that you kind of need auto layout to be able to kind of progress as a senior designer. You definitely don't, because I currently don't. So kind of slightly hypocritical me saying learn auto layout, considering I haven't. But in terms of things, it's kind of, in a sense, you can be that go-to person and saying, okay, this would be effective in terms of us developing kind of, our design system. It's just knowing where things are and how things work. Different people have different specialties. So for example, within my team at Paramount, I would say I'm kind of the person where I'd come up with a great idea. My execution may not be the quickest, But I know other people on my team who, you know, can take my idea, flourish that nicely, and we can kind of work back and forth. So yeah, it's just, you know, specializing in different areas kind of always helps. And then, yeah, so kind of going on to the end, which is just Q&As. If anyone has any questions whatsoever. I know I spoke very quickly, and hopefully most of you or some of you were able to.
Fusibi is frozen for me. Is it frozen for anybody?
Oh. Can you all hear me still? Okay.
I think you froze for a minute there, but we'll get you back again.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, yes?
Yeah, good for me.
Okay.
Good for everybody else?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, no worries. But yeah, like I was saying, any questions? I know I spoke very quickly through a lot of that. And I know kind of, you know, some of you might be thinking, oh, I already do this, or, you know, how does this, you know, how do I apply this to my current role? I'm happy to kind of, I guess, answer, you know, I guess more scenario based. If, you know, you're in a current role and you have any questions, or if you're kind of applying, you know, to a more senior role, or you're applying to, you know, your first ever role, I'm more than happy to kind of answer things on that level if anyone has any.
Thank you so much. Can I start off with a question? I thought it was a really interesting and good point about where you go next and the future design thinking. So how would you build that into your case study portfolio that you're then going to be presenting for jobs?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the key areas to kind of, I guess, that some people tend to miss out on, you know, case studies and portfolios is it tends to actually be the end after you've shown the final design. So a lot of the time we kind of build case studies based on this time limit and this, you know, very specific brief and these limitations. But at the end of, you know, I pretty much say at the end of every case study, make, you know, the opportunity to kind of add in, you know, what next for this project or the future of this project. What this actually shows is just your continuous thinking around problems and your continuous ability to kind of, you know, I guess, broaden your horizon. So for example, one thing that kind of, you know, helped me, I feel like I joke and say I'm kind of like a serial interviewer when it comes to like, you know, applying for design jobs. I think last year alone, I think I did about, considering I'm very happy in my role, I just kind of enjoy, well, I don't want to say enjoy interviewing, but I just kind of enjoy being in a position where, you know, I interview at different companies and understand, you know, what's best for me. But one thing that's definitely happened, well, helped me in a sense, is just at the end of some of my projects, I just talk about how I want to build some of these out into reality. So I just talk about, you know, little things like, oh, I want to learn this bit of software, or, oh, do you know what? While I was doing this, I didn't really know how to do this. So now I've gone about, you know, trying to do things like that. And some things, those little things kind of reflected during my interviews, and people saw that as, you know, a good approach, because the more senior you get, it should be that opportunity for you to kind of always be thinking on your toes and always being, you know, one step ahead of, you know, the business or the task at hand. So yeah.
Thank you. Who else has got a question? Feel free to take yourself off mute or put it in chat.
Yeah, no one rush.
Hi, Fusibi.
Hi.
I really liked your speech, and it's kind of reassuring that you're in your position and you don't know auto layout, because I don't also have a clue. I'm basically applying for a junior role.
Yeah.
And a question which I'm a bit nervous about is like, what's my process?
Yeah.
I don't really feel like I'm in a position where I have a defined like process. I feel like, would you recommend being honest about that, or would you recommend kind of having a clear answer kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think there's two things with that. One thing I would say is when it comes to process and having that clear answer is you never want to sound robotic. The reason why you never want to sound robotic in terms of saying, oh, I do this and kind of almost comes across that you're kind of almost reading it off the screen, is within the industry, it's kind of, I guess, widely known and understood is, your design process tends to change quite a lot. Sometimes when you're doing a project, you're not going to have time to do medium fidelity, and you may just go from low fidelity to high fidelity. It's not always the best practice, but it's something that definitely kind of like people understand and know, which is why whenever I talk about my process, I kind of always choose to talk about it from the perspective of a project I've done. So for example, someone says, oh, can you talk me through, your design process and how you go about things? And I just kind of say, quite recently I was working on a project for Paramount. What it was doing was solving the browse experience. The first thing I did there was, do a little bit of research. And then from there, I then took that research into a bit more fidelity. And then from there, I then was able to, speak with a few stakeholders and then hand that over to developers. The nice thing about that kind of phrase is, one, you're showing you have experience applying the process, which is really what they want to hear. Because, every kind of senior designer that interviews knows the design process. They don't want you to necessarily reiterate it to them, but they just want to hear that you have the ability to have previously applied it or to use that, to have used that skill. So I would say find your own method of explaining your process that you feel comfortable with. Mine is always using an example. But yeah, hopefully that kind of answers what you're referring to.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really helpful. I think kind of like being able to explain what the parameters are of the project that you're doing is kind of like the most important thing in showing that you understand the process now, in terms of I guess, as opposed to like parroting, I do X or X or X. So yeah, thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
No worries. Any more questions?
Fatima, Shanice, you've interviewed recently. Is there anything that Fusibi has said that you think you might want to bring into future interviews? Fatima's got a question in chat. How did you find transitioning from junior to senior?
I think in terms of things, my experience was slightly different. I worked at a startup as one of the very early designers in that process. So it kind of, threw me into the deep end in terms of, transitioning from, junior to senior. Very quickly, I had to kind of adopt a lot of the senior-esque tasks in terms of like thinking ahead and the strategy. But I think in terms of things, the day-to-day is not very different. What I would say is, in my experience, is kind of, your focus on the design changes. In that sense, not that you don't design as much, but you become a more all-rounded individual in terms of, not necessarily just spending, 24/7 in Figma. I now spend like, 50% of my day on Slack, just speaking to product managers, developers, the legal team, kind of all different individuals. But overall, I think it's been kind of a very nice experience to have that added responsibility. And I guess from my thing is, I've always enjoyed kind of like mentoring and helping junior designers as best as possible. So that's kind of been like my highlight of, I guess, the overall transition. So yeah.
And she goes on to ask, what are your best interview tips?
Best interview tips. I think one of the things that I personally always kind of utilize is, for one, always stalk who's interviewing you. I know it sounds very, very creepy, but kind of go on their LinkedIn, look at where they've worked previously, kind of, you know, look through their own portfolio. Because, for example, like I think in like last year, I had the chance to interview at Snapchat, which is a nice experience, too many rounds. But in terms of things, the people who are interviewing me, I literally went on their LinkedIn, look at their portfolios, and I saw that a lot of them were very UI focused. It doesn't kind of mean that, oh, do you know what, because they're UI focused, that means, you know, that's exactly what I should show them. But it kind of gave me a little insight that that's potentially what these people favored. And that's what they were kind of like, almost that they would kind of scream at, like, oh yeah, do you know what, that's amazing. Because, you know, they like UI themselves and they're kind of in with the details. I think that's one thing I would say definitely has helped me. I think another that potentially would is just always be mindful of your timing. I think it's very easy to put your portfolio on screen and read it word for word from beginning to end. But what you need to learn to do is either paraphrase certain aspects of your process in terms of if you're summarizing your research or, you know, summarizing, you know, the final solution. But yeah, just try to, you know, be mindful of time and not exactly kind of read it from end to end. Because obviously I've had experience interviewing as well as a senior designer. But I found that, you know, a few individuals kind of, when they get into the process, their thing is to kind of just read their case study end to end. And what you need to realize is a lot of senior designers or people interviewing you in general sometimes have your portfolio on screen and they can follow it and read in more detail. But what they want to hear you in that very short, like 45 to 30 minutes you have, is just to, you know, say the best parts kind of thing. So yeah.
What would you say is the biggest challenges you've faced transitioning from junior to senior?
I think the biggest thing was I'm very introverted. I know I kind of may not come across, but I did not enjoy talking in meetings, talking to anybody. I just wanted to design, get my paycheck, you know, go to a few like work events and just kind of be very quiet. But I think in some things, one of the harder things was being in meetings with people who were a lot more senior and were a lot more, I guess, had a lot more status than me. Whether or not that was a lead designer or that was a CEO, like I never forget kind of one of my first, you know, presentations that the CEO decided to, you know, drop in for. It's something that definitely like threw me off guard. But I'd say in terms of things, you know, unless you try, you're never gonna know. So definitely, I think that was probably one of the scarier, like harder things for me to, you know, initially adjust to. But now I kind of view them more as just, you know, individuals who are just trying to get like the bigger picture app or website done. So they're not these kind of people, like the CEO doesn't join the meeting thinking, oh, if he gets something wrong, I'm gonna fire him. Like he joins the meeting just wanting to know about the feature or wanting to know more about the project. So yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else got a question? Anita, Randy, Chloe?
I have a question. I guess, how did you find being in the first cohort for Love Circular?
Yeah. I think in some things it was definitely very scary. Because, you know, for me it was, I think for everyone kind of thing, it's the process of wanting to transition from, you know, your initial career to just something completely different. I think, you know, initially, well, I can't say like back in my day, but because I'm not that old, hopefully. But I think in terms of things, when I first started, it was very much so, if you didn't have a qualification for something, you shouldn't really be applying for it. I went to uni and my impression was, I need this degree relates to this job and this job kind of, you know, relates to this degree. And that's kind of, you know, the impression I initially had. So when, you know, I spoke to Zaire on kind of Twitter, which was quite interesting because there's a long story about it, but you know, for me, joining the first cohort was me just DMing him and being like, I've read on this UX UI thing, I've watched YouTube videos, like, how do I get on this course and how do I get you to teach me how to do this thing? And yeah, in terms of things, I think for me, even one of the, I guess, highlights of that first initial cohort was, which I think is quite nice that it exists now, and I always tell students use it as much as possible, is just the community aspect of things. It sounds very like, you know, brandy and be like, oh, it's all about community, but honestly, the ability to like learn with, because my cohort was 3 people, but the ability to like, you know, just work with those 3 people for all of what was, I think it was a lot shorter back then. I think all of what was like 2 months was just, for me, incredible, because I could kind of, you know, sometimes we turn up to, you know, lessons and they'd be way ahead of where I was. And I'd be like, do you know what, next week I need to kind of, you know, be where they are and kind of, so it was kind of nice to, you know, have that sense of small competition in terms of, you know, trying to stay on the ball and trying to all kind of like achieve now. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Chloe has asked in chat, would we be able to view your portfolio?
Yeah, of course. My portfolio is always under construction, but literally it is just for CB. Oh, am I not typing? No, it is just for cb.co.uk. Currently, this is what it looks like. I just put like this nice little interaction of like a card and things like that. But yeah, you can have a look at it. It's kind of always up there. Yeah, I'll just put it at the end of this presentation as well, just, you know, for a link to click through and things like that. But yeah, it's just my first name.co.uk. Very much so. One thing I would say, I guess when you look through my portfolio, this isn't like a caveat of, oh, by the way, but when you get a lot more senior, there is a different expectation of potentially what exists within your portfolio. It's not necessarily like this written rule of, oh, when you get more senior, like remove kind of like the detail. But when you get slightly more senior, the very, I guess, foundational things are what you say, and it's in your, it's in what I say rather than what I've written down on screen. Very much so. When I talk through my process, I'm saying it and I haven't written it on screen. So what I would say is don't kind of use this as a template of this is what I need to do as a brand new junior designer and let me remove like all the process within it. So for example, very quickly is like I talk about my work at Florence, but what I've done with it is I very much talk about it like a story point of view. It's just my take of, you know, how I explain things. I say like the journey of building an MVP, understanding users and the company needs, gathering insights. And it's just kind of my approach to being able to talk about things. Within this, I still definitely talk about, you know, my testing, my ideation, you know, the user flows I came up with. But yeah, from, I guess, the initial visibility of it, yeah, don't exactly, you know, take it as let me just show all the visuals and no context as to, you know, the research I did. So yeah, it sounds like a caveat, but yeah, it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for Fusibi this lunchtime?
I had another question. I just wanted to say your portfolio looks really good.
Thank you.
I guess what tools do you mainly use? I'm assuming Figma, but is there anything else that you use as well?
In some things, what for design wise, or just in general on a kind of like day-to-day basis?
I guess like in your role, like what tools are you
Yeah.
using?
I think in some things, like I always tell designers to kind of, you know, just explore or be aware of some of the other tools that, you know, different companies use that aren't necessarily design tools. So for example, be familiar with, if you can be familiar with Slack, which you kind of should already be because we're Love Circulars run on Slack. Be familiar with Notion. It depends on your company size, but you can be familiar with Jira or Confluence. Let me write those down in the thing. Actually, do you know, I might put together a list for me to actually share after this, because obviously for now, but yeah, Jira and Confluence are basically what slightly larger companies do to kind of like to, I guess, to have a bit of organization. They're not tools that, you know, you get there and you should know how they work completely, but it's just being familiar that they exist. So if someone said, hey, by the way, we're using Jira, you're not kind of thinking to yourself, oh, is this some design term? Is this something I should know? No, it's a project management tool. So yeah, it's just being familiar with that. And I guess other than that, it's just one other tool that, you know, I feel like a lot of designers should know about is called Loom, which you may or may not know, but sorry, I can't remember design agency. Loom is just what some companies use to kind of like, I guess, screen record in simple terms. You can screen record, and it's what I use because I work with Americans, so a lot of them are based in the US. So what I do is I make a Loom video and I literally explain, you know, my designs to them. And the benefit of that is they can watch that later. They don't have to live be on the call. The benefit is, you know, I've talked to that process and my manager can say, okay, yeah, great. I've had a look at this. Thank you. So yeah, that's just another tool that's kind of used, but yeah.
Larry goes on to ask, do we need to know other tools such as InVision and Adobe?
So in terms of things, I always say just pick one tool in your arsenal when it comes to actual design software. If you selected Figma, stick with Figma. Obviously, from time to time, you get companies saying they want you to be familiar with, you know, Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma. But I guess the main thing with it is when a lot of the time when you understand Figma, you tend to understand Adobe XD and Sketch. So what I would say is even if you didn't know those in and out, like download them, have a look at the similarities, just so you have that confidence to be able to say, actually, do you know what? If needs be, I can actually sit down and start working in Adobe XD. And the other thing you mentioned was like InVision. Those are just tools that, you know, some companies use, some don't. So for example, in my current role, there is no specific need for a prototyping tool. We use Figma to prototype. We do kind of very simple, you know, prototypes, but obviously in different roles and different companies, there is a lot more focus on, you know, having a prototype that looks exactly like the product. So, you know, you may have to learn a bit of Protopie, or you might have to learn a bit of, you know, InVision. But what I always tell people is in every role, especially if you're applying as a junior, there is no expectation for you to be an expert. So it's okay to know about these, but not be an expert in them, and kind of, you know, be open. You can openly say if you want to and say, oh yeah, you know, I've heard about, you know, Protopie a little bit, but I'm not as familiar with it, but I'm open to learn it. And I'm open to adding it to the tools in terms of what, if this job requires it, kind of thing. So yeah.
Any other final questions? Fusibi, have you got anything final to share with us? It's been so insightful. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. I think in terms of things, I will probably, because I know some of you may have questions that pop up later and things like that. I'm not on Slack as often as possible because at work I get a lot of Slack messages. So sometimes I close my Slack. But what I do say to people is if you do have UX UI questions, feel free to actually I'll drop it in the chat, but feel free to just message me on social media platforms, but just mainly like Twitter. Twitter, I'm trying to think of what my handle is, but in some things, most people just message me on there, and that way, because I don't get like work messages on there, it's a lot easier for me to just cater to kind of like anyone who has, you know, UX, UI questions, or on LinkedIn. Those are my two kind of go-tos in terms of being able to help out or answer questions. But yeah.
Thanks so much for being willing to answer questions post-session, and everybody enjoy your afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.